Welcome to Bedtime Docs. If you enjoy calm storytelling and peaceful documentaries, feel free to subscribe and join us for more quiet journeys. Now, settle in, breathe slowly, and let the story begin. The night is quiet, and the world around you begins to soften. As your breathing slows, we travel together into a story older than most civilizations, a story wrapped in knowledge, fire, and silence. Tonight, we step into the legend of a place where the world once gathered its greatest wisdom, a place that held the thoughts of poets, scientists, philosophers, astronomers, and dreamers. A place whose disappearance became one of the most painful losses in human history, the Library of Alexandria. But before it became a symbol of tragedy, it was a symbol of hope, a bright flame in a world still learning how to understand itself. Imagine the ancient Mediterranean, ships crossing quiet waters, merchants carrying spices, papyrus, glass, and in the distance, a city rising along the Egyptian coast, a city unlike any other. Alexandria, a crossroads of cultures, a meeting point between Africa, Asia, and Europe, a place where languages mixed in busy streets and ideas traveled farther than armies ever could. Within this city stood the dream of a king. More than 2,000 years ago, Alexander the Great founded Alexandria with a single vision, a place where knowledge would be treasured as much as power. After his death, his successors continued that dream. They wanted a library, not just a building, but a world of thought, a sanctuary for every text, every scroll, every fragment of wisdom found across the ancient world. And so, on the edge of the sea, they built it, a grand library where scholars could read, write, argue, and imagine, not loudly, not in chaos, but in a calm, focused silence, a silence filled with the turning of pages, the scratch of ink, the slow breath of study. The Library of Alexandria became the beating heart of ancient knowledge. It was said that its shelves held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, poetry, philosophy, the ideas of entire civilizations stored in one place. Travelers from distant lands came to Alexandria just to glimpse its halls. Ships arriving at the port were searched for scrolls, not gold. Texts were copied on the spot so the library could preserve them. Inside, scholars lived almost like monks of knowledge, studying by lamplight, debating the shape of the stars, measuring the size of the earth, and asking questions no one had dared ask before. But great centers of knowledge rarely live untouched. They attract admiration and danger. In time, the Library of Alexandria would face storms stronger than any army: politics, wars, fires, and the slow erosion of human memory. Yet before its fall, it shone brighter than any place of learning the ancient world had ever seen. In the next part, we step inside the library, into its halls, its scholars, and the quiet brilliance that once filled its rooms. For now, breathe slowly and let the calm story of Alexandria's greatest treasure settle gently into the night. Inside the library, before the fires, before the wars, before the world forgot what was lost, the Library of Alexandria stood as a quiet sanctuary where knowledge lived and breathed. Imagine stepping inside, not into a single room, but into a vast complex stretching across courtyards, lecture halls, reading rooms, and gardens designed to calm the mind. Sunlight slipped through high windows and settled softly on rows of wooden shelves filled with scrolls, papyrus rolled carefully and tied with thin strips of linen. The air carried a faint scent of ink and sea wind. Somewhere nearby, waves brushed gently against the harbor, as if the ocean itself was listening to the world's greatest ideas being whispered within these walls. This was not a library in the way we imagine today. It was a universe of thought. A scholar arriving at the library would find more than scrolls. He would find a community: mathematicians, philosophers, astronomers, healers, linguists, and poets, all living together, eating together, thinking together. They woke with the sun, ate simple meals, and spent the entire day in quiet study or spirited debate. The library's companion institution, the Mausion, served almost like a university or monastery. It offered rooms for scholars, gardens for reflection, observatories for studying the stars, and spaces where ideas could take shape without interruption. Inside these halls, questions found answers, and answers led to deeper questions. Here, scholars measured the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy. They charted constellations and mapped the heavens. They studied medicine, dissected animals, wrote encyclopedias, and attempted to categorize nearly everything humans had ever learned. The greatest minds of the era walked these corridors. Eratosthenes, who calculated the size of the planet using nothing but shadows and angles. Euclid, whose work in geometry still shapes mathematics today. Herophilus, one of the first physicians to explore the human body through systematic study. And countless others whose names slipped quietly through the cracks of history when the library fell silent. Imagine their voices, soft conversations echoing through stone halls, feet moving gently across polished floors, the quiet sound of scrolls being unrolled, and outside, the call of the sea, steady, ancient, watching everything. For a moment in history, the world had a center, a place where curiosity was more valuable than gold, a place built not on conquest but on understanding. But knowledge, like light, can be fragile. As the centuries turned, winds shifted, empires rose and fell, rulers changed, and with each era, the library faced new dangers that would slowly dim its once brilliant flame. In the next part, we drift into the beginning of that long decline, the politics, the conflicts, and the moments where one decision could alter the fate of knowledge forever. But for now, rest into the quiet, and let the memory of a world devoted to learning settle gently in your mind. Great civilizations rarely fall in an instant. The beginning is almost always quiet. A shift in power, a political change, a misunderstanding that grows slowly into something far larger. So it was with the Library of Alexandria. For years, the library lived peacefully under the protection of the Ptolemaic kings, the successors of Alexander the Great. These rulers invested in knowledge, collected texts from every port, and treated scholars as ambassadors of wisdom. But time pulled the world in different directions. New kings rose, some passionate about learning, others distracted by war, ambition, or pride. And in these transitions, the library began to feel the first tremors of uncertainty. The city of Alexandria, bright and alive, became a stage for political tension. Egypt, once united under a strong dynasty, faced internal disputes, foreign influence, and pressures from the expanding Roman Republic. The library stood at the center of it all, not just as a building, but as a symbol of Greek culture on Egyptian soil, a symbol of intellectual freedom, a symbol of influence that some rulers admired and others feared. In the quiet reading halls, scholars continued their work, unaware that outside the walls, the world around them was changing. They read ancient texts, translated foreign scripts, and preserved ideas from places devastated by war. But sometimes knowledge becomes a casualty not of violence, but of politics. Some rulers questioned why the library held so much power. Others feared that information could be used against them. And so the library, once protected, began to stand on fragile ground. At the same time, tension in Alexandria grew between different cultures: Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Jews, each group seeking its own place in a city that belonged to everyone and to no one. The Library of Alexandria remained a beacon, but the world around it was becoming more complex, more uncertain, more fragile. And in the shadows of that fragility came a moment, one spark, that would begin the long unraveling of the greatest repository of knowledge the ancient world had ever known. In the next part, we move into the era where the library met its first major threat, a conflict so intense that it would echo through history for thousands of years. But for now, take a slow breath and let the story drift deeper into the quiet of the night. The first great wound to the Library of Alexandria did not come from hatred of knowledge, but from the chaos of war. It was the year 48 BCE. Rome was tearing itself apart through civil conflict, ambitious generals and political rivals fighting for control of an empire that stretched across continents. One of those generals was Julius Caesar. He arrived in Alexandria pursuing his opponent, Pompey. But instead of finding refuge, he found a city divided, a war brewing within the royal family of Egypt. Alexandria, the bright jewel of the Mediterranean, was suddenly a battlefield. Caesar, trapped in the city and heavily outnumbered, took control of the harbor to secure his position. He ordered the burning of ships, Roman ships, Egyptian ships, vessels on both sides of the conflict, to block the port and prevent enemy forces from surrounding him. The plan worked too well. Fire spread quickly across the docks. Winds carried sparks inland. Flames leapt from wood to warehouse, from warehouse to market, from market toward the district where scrolls were stored in large quantities awaiting copying and cataloging. No one wanted the library to burn. No order was given. No intention was aimed at knowledge. But ancient cities were tightly built. Wooden beams, papyrus shops, scroll depots, all vulnerable to even the smallest ember. And on that night, the winds were strong. Some parts of the library complex were spared: the main halls, the reading rooms, the Mausean. But the fire reached the storehouses near the harbor, places where the library kept its overflow collection. Texts waiting to be copied, scrolls arriving from foreign ships, rare works stored temporarily before being moved into the main catalog. Thousands of scrolls, possibly tens of thousands, were destroyed in that blaze. For the first time, the Library of Alexandria felt the sting of loss. Scholars watched helplessly as smoke rose above the city, carrying with it fragments of ideas, stories, knowledge that would never be recovered. Yet the library survived, wounded but alive. The fires did not destroy it completely, but they marked the beginning of a long struggle, a reminder that the preservation of knowledge depends not only on wisdom, but on the fragile stability of the world around it. And that stability was fading. In the next part, we enter the era where the library faced its greatest political enemies, a time when rivalry, ideology, and intolerance would prove more dangerous than fire. For now, let your breath soften and stay with the quiet as the story continues. After the fires of Caesar, Alexandria changed. The city rebuilt its harbor. Trade resumed. The library continued its mission, copying texts, translating works, preserving everything it could. But outside its walls, the ancient world was shifting. Rome grew stronger, Egypt grew weaker, and the fragile balance that once protected the library began to tilt toward new forces. When Cleopatra died and Egypt became a province of Rome, Alexandria was no longer a kingdom of ideas. It was a jewel in someone else's crown. The Roman Empire admired Greek knowledge, but admired power even more. And in time, Rome introduced new philosophies, new priorities, new ways of thinking that slowly reshaped the role of the library. The scholars still worked, but their world felt different, less certain, less stable, less respected by the rulers who now held authority. Inside the library halls, ideas flowed freely: astronomy, mathematics, medicine, poetry, studies of the human body, maps of distant lands, theories about the shape of the universe. But outside those walls, the world was becoming less patient with disagreement. New religions were rising, new beliefs were spreading. People debated not just ideas, but truth itself. And truth can be dangerous when the world is looking for certainty. Alexandria became a crossroads of different cultures and competing ideologies. Greek scholars who believed in philosophy, Roman officials who believed in authority, Egyptian priests who believed in tradition, and emerging Christian thinkers who believed the old world was fading away. The library stood at the center, neutral, open, a sanctuary for all knowledge. But sanctuaries rarely remain untouched when the world outside grows divided. Arguments begin to spill from lecture halls into the streets. Debates turned into disputes, disputes into hostility, and hostility into movements that demanded purity over curiosity. Some rulers still protected the library. Others saw it as a relic of a world they wished to replace. And slowly, quietly, the library lost the political shield that once kept it safe. Its greatest threat was no longer fire, but the changing hearts of the people around it. As centuries passed, one empire after another placed its mark on Alexandria, each leaving behind new rulers, new beliefs, and new tensions that would gradually pull the city apart. The library endured, but the world that needed it was falling out of balance. In the next part, we move into the age where ideology and power collided, a time when even knowledge could be considered dangerous, and the library stood at the edge of another storm. As centuries passed, Alexandria was no longer the confident, harmonious city it once had been. Now it was a place where ideas collided, not gently, not thoughtfully, but with the sharpness that comes when people believe their truth must be the only truth. Philosophers still gathered in the shadow of the library's columns, but they were no longer the only voices shaping the city. New movements were rising, belief systems that promised clarity in a world growing complicated and unstable. Ideas that made people feel protected, even as they closed the doors to everything unfamiliar. And in this growing tension, the library found itself not as a neutral space, but as a symbol of the very world some groups wanted to leave behind. Because inside the library lived questions, debates, contradictions, theories that challenged tradition, knowledge from civilizations with different gods, different customs, different visions of the universe. For many, this was beautiful, the celebration of human thought. But for others, it was threatening. Some believed that the old scrolls held dangerous ideas, that philosophy invited doubt, that astronomy challenged heaven, that medicine questioned miracles, that history contradicted belief. And in times of uncertainty, doubt is often seen as an enemy. The library had survived war, survived fire, survived political shifts, but ideology is a far more unpredictable force, because ideology lives in people, in their fears, their hopes, their certainty that they must defend their beliefs no matter the cost. And Alexandria was becoming a place where groups fought not with armies, but with influence. Each new ruler brought a new vision for the city. Some valued knowledge, others valued control. A few saw the library as a treasure, others saw it as a threat. The scholars felt the change. They sensed that their work was becoming fragile, dependent not on logic or truth, but on the approval of those in power. Some scrolls quietly disappeared, not burned, not destroyed, simply removed by rulers who disliked them, or hidden by scholars who feared they would be banned. The library still stood. Its halls still echoed softly with the turning of scrolls, but a shadow had fallen over it, a shadow not of fire, but of intolerance. And intolerance is not quick. It does not destroy in a single night. It erodes, slowly, silently, like the tide eating away at a piece of stone. In the next part, we step into the age where this slow erosion turns into the second great blow, a moment when political conflict and ideological rivalry threatened the library more deeply than fire ever could. The library had survived wars, survived shifting empires, and survived the first Great Fire, but now it faced something far more complex. A city where politics, belief, and ambition were pulling in different directions. Alexandria was no longer just a center of learning. It had become a center of tension. A place where groups fought for influence over the future of the ancient world. In this climate, a single conflict could ignite something far larger, and it did. The tension reached its peak during the rule of the Roman emperors, when Alexandria became trapped between competing powers. Roman governors seeking control, local elites defending their identity, religious groups rising in influence, philosophers trying to keep the old world alive. And in the middle of all this stood the library, not as a target, but as a symbol of the intellectual world many felt was slipping away. During the 3rd century CE, Alexandria erupted into conflict, not from foreign invaders, but from within. Civil unrest spread through the streets, riots broke out, different factions battled for control of districts, of temples, of public life. And when a city fights itself, nothing is safe. Some records say that parts of the library complex, including secondary collections and nearby structures, were damaged or destroyed during these internal conflicts. It wasn't a single blaze, not one moment of catastrophe, but a slow breaking down. Walls damaged in riots, scrolls stolen or scattered, collections fragmented by the chaos of a divided city. There were no scholars walking between peaceful gardens, no quiet debates in shaded courtyards, no patient copying of ancient texts. Instead, there was noise, fear, uncertainty. The library's role in the city was no longer central. It was vulnerable. A shadow fell over its halls, not from fire, but from the realization that it no longer had the protection of a stable world. Still, the library endured, wounded again, but not destroyed, because knowledge, even when fading, holds on longer than anyone expects. But another era was approaching, one where conflict would not be accidental or indirect, but driven by deep ideological change. A time when even the idea of the library conflicted with the world around it. In the next part, we move closer to the most dramatic chapter, the age of religious transformation, intellectual fear, and the events that many believe lit the final fire. The ancient world was entering a new age. Belief systems were changing, new religions rising, old philosophies fading. The world that once celebrated debate was now searching for certainty. Alexandria, always a crossroads, felt these changes more than any other city. The streets that once echoed with philosophical discussions now echoed with arguments about faith, doctrine, and truth. People wanted answers, simple, direct answers. But the library had always been a place of questions, and questions were becoming uncomfortable. The rise of Christianity brought compassion, hope, and community to millions across the Roman Empire. But, as with any powerful movement, some leaders gained influence not through tolerance, but through the desire to remove everything associated with the old world. To them, the library represented ideas that no longer fit the city's new identity, not because they rejected knowledge, but because the library preserved worldviews that clashed with emerging belief systems. Philosophers continued to teach in the halls of the Mausean. Astronomers charted the heavens. Mathematicians wrote treatises that would influence the world for centuries to come. But the city outside was transforming faster than the scholars inside. Disputes arose between philosophical schools and religious authorities. Rival groups clashed in debates that spilled into the streets. The library stood not at the center of unity, but at the center of tension. And tension is a dangerous thing when mixed with power. By the late 4th century CE, Alexandria's leadership was shifting dramatically. Some officials sought to restrict pagan teachings. Some temples dedicated to old gods were closed or repurposed, and public philosophy was increasingly viewed with suspicion. Knowledge itself was not the enemy, but the freedom to explore any knowledge became a point of conflict. Imagine the library at this time. Scholars walking its halls with quieter footsteps, scrolls handled not with confidence but with caution, a sense in the air that the world was narrowing and the wide horizon of thought was being pulled inward. Some scholars left the city. Others stayed, hoping the storm would pass, hoping the library would endure, as it always had. But the storm was just beginning, and soon a single tragic event would ignite emotions, violence, and a turning point that historians still debate to this day. An event connected not directly to the library, but to the idea of intellectual freedom itself. In the next part, we walk into the story of Hypatia, the brilliant philosopher whose life and death became a symbol of the final struggle for Alexandria's ancient world. In the fading centuries of the ancient world, when old beliefs and new beliefs collided, one figure stood quietly at the center of Alexandria's intellectual life. A woman, a philosopher, a teacher, a symbol of everything the library once represented. Her name was Hypatia. She was born into a world of knowledge. Her father, Theon, was one of the last known scholars to work within the tradition of the Mausean, the intellectual echo of the original Library of Alexandria. From a young age, Hypatia walked the same streets that once carried the footsteps of Euclid, Eratosthenes, and countless others. She inherited their calm confidence, their discipline, their devotion to reason. She studied mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, not in secret, not in fear, but openly, believing that knowledge was a gift meant to be shared. And so she taught. Her classroom was the city itself, its colonnades, its open squares, its lecture halls bathed in soft Mediterranean light. Students gathered around her, listening to her gentle voice as she spoke about geometry, the motion of the planets, the nature of the human soul. She taught Christians, pagans, and Jews alike. She made no distinctions. To her, a curious mind was simply a curious mind. In a world dividing itself into camps, Hypatia remained a bridge, an almost impossible role in a time that no longer welcomed bridges. Alexandria was changing. Power had shifted towards strong religious authorities. The city's political leaders were locked in bitter rivalry, and Hypatia, respected and influential, found herself caught between forces she never sought to challenge. She did not lead protests. She did not incite anger. She simply embodied the old world's quiet belief that reason and discussion were the path to truth. But in an age of rising tension, reason became suspect. Questions became dangerous, and someone who brought people together was seen by some as standing in the way. Whispers grew, rumors spread. Some claimed she influenced politics. Others said her teachings opposed the new order. None of it was true, but truth in those years had become fragile. And one day, the fragile world around her broke. A mob, driven by fear, rage, and the belief that eliminating a philosopher would somehow restore peace, trapped Hypatia as she traveled home. The details differ across historical accounts, but all agree on one thing. Her death was brutal, senseless, and deeply symbolic. The last great philosopher of Alexandria was silenced, not because of what she believed, but because the world around her could no longer tolerate the freedom of thought she represented. Her death echoed through the city like a final warning, a sign that the age of open inquiry was ending. And though the library had already suffered its wounds, the spirit that once filled it seemed to dim with her passing. It was not the end yet, but it felt like the beginning of the end. In the next part, we approach the final chapter, the moment when the ancient world's greatest treasure faced its last and most devastating blow. After Hypatia's death, a quiet settled over Alexandria, not the peaceful quiet that once filled its lecture halls, but a heavy, uncertain silence. It was the silence of a city that had crossed a threshold, a silence that follows when people realize the world they knew has slipped out of their hands. The scholars who remained felt the change immediately. Some stopped teaching, some fled to other cities, others stayed, hoping to protect what little remained of a once great intellectual tradition. But Alexandria was no longer the city that embraced philosophy. It was now a city redefining itself, a city building a new identity and leaving behind the remnants of the old. And standing in this shifting landscape was a building known as the Serapeium. Originally a grand temple dedicated to the god Serapis, the Serapeium had become, over the centuries, a place deeply intertwined with the legacy of the library. Many historians believe that parts of the library's collection, especially works displaced from earlier damage, were housed within or near the Serapeium. It became a refuge for books, a quieter branch, a last echo of the once vast library complex. But in the late 4th century CE, the Serapeium stood at the center of a growing conflict. Religious and political tensions had reached a boiling point. Alexandria's leadership was determined to remove symbols of the old pagan world, and the Serapeium was one of the last and most prominent. In the year 391 CE, under the orders of Emperor Theodosius and enforced by local authorities, the Serapeium was targeted. Not as a center of knowledge, not as a library, but as a religious monument out of step with the city's new identity. What followed is described differently in various accounts, but the essence remains. The Serapeium was destroyed, its statues toppled, its walls broken, its symbolic presence erased, and with it, any remaining scrolls or texts stored in its halls likely vanished. Not in a dramatic blaze that lit up the night sky, not in a single catastrophic moment, but in deliberate dismantling, piece by piece, as new authority reclaimed the city. To the leaders of that time, it was a victory over the old world. To the scholars, it was a heartbreak beyond words. Because the destruction of the Serapeium was not just the loss of a building, it was the loss of the last safe harbor for the surviving fragments of the Library of Alexandria. And though some texts survived in distant lands, carried by scholars, copied in other cities, Alexandria itself would never again be the shining sanctuary of wisdom it once had been. Yet, even now, the final end had not come. There was still one last chapter, a final disappearance, so quiet and gradual that the world almost didn't notice when the library was gone. After the destruction of the Serapeium, Alexandria did not suddenly lose all that remained of its knowledge. The end did not come in a single moment of violence, nor in a blaze bright enough to mark the sky. It happened quietly, scroll by scroll, shelf by shelf, generation by generation. Some scholars stayed in the city, carrying fragments of the library's teachings in their minds. their notes, their personal collections. Others left, traveling to Athens, Constantinople, Antioch, taking copies of some texts to distant lands. A few manuscripts survived in private homes, in small schools, in monasteries far from the political storms that reshaped Alexandria. The library's knowledge did not die. It scattered. Yet Alexandria itself, the city that once stood as the guardian of the world's wisdom, no longer had a place for the library spirit. The great halls were deserted, the lecture rooms silent. Reading spaces that were once full of gentle whispers and turning scrolls became empty chambers filled with dust. New rulers came, focused on administration and survival, not preservation. Earthquakes struck the city over the centuries, destroying buildings and reshaping the coastline. Parts of ancient Alexandria slipped beneath the sea. Floods washed away structures that once held knowledge. Neglect allowed walls to crumble, and the fragile papyrus scrolls, so vulnerable to humidity, insects, heat, and time, slowly decayed. No single chronicler recorded the exact moment the last scroll vanished. No witness stood at the ruins to write, "This is the end of the Library of Alexandria." Instead, the library faded away through absence, as if it slipped quietly into the night. And when later generations looked back, searching for the library that once defined the ancient world, they found only fragments, legends, memories. Some believed the final blow came with the Arab conquest in 642 CE, though many historians reject this account as a later myth. Most evidence suggests that by that time there was little left to destroy. The library's disappearance was not an act of one ruler, one army, one religion, or one moment. It was the consequence of centuries of change, political, social, natural, woven together into a slow unraveling, a quiet dissolution, the end of a dream that had burned brightly for nearly 1,000 years. And yet, the story does not end in sadness, because even in its absence, the library cast a shadow so large, so enduring, that the world spent centuries trying to rebuild what it had once been. In the next part, we explore that legacy, the echoes of the library that shaped the world we live in today. The library may have vanished, but its absence created one of the most powerful echoes in human history. For centuries after its disappearance, travelers, scholars, and rulers spoke of it not as a building lost, but as an idea that the world could not live without. The Library of Alexandria became a symbol, a memory of what humanity could achieve when curiosity was valued more than conquest, and when knowledge was allowed to flow freely without borders. Fragments of its work survived in unexpected places. Greek texts copied in Alexandria found their way to Constantinople. Arabic scholars later preserved and expanded them during the Golden Age of Islam. When Europe entered the Renaissance, these same ideas, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, helped spark a new era of learning. Across continents, across languages, across time itself, the influence of the ancient library re-emerged like light traveling through space, dimmed, delayed, but never truly gone. Even our modern libraries, with their quiet aisles and endless shelves, carry something of Alexandria's spirit, the desire to preserve knowledge, the belief that learning is for everyone, the promise that ideas should be shared, not hidden. And so, the library's story became more than a loss. It became a lesson, a reminder of how fragile knowledge can be, and how powerful it becomes when protected, shared, and passed from one generation to the next. Over time, historians searched for the library's physical remains. Divers explored Alexandria's sunken harbor, hoping to find its ruins beneath the waves. Archaeologists mapped ancient streets, trying to match them to descriptions from long ago. But the library was never truly about its walls. Its real legacy lives in the human desire to understand the world, to study the stars, to measure the earth, to preserve stories, to ask questions even when the answers seem far away. The memory of Alexandria became a seed that grew again and again in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, in the universities of Europe, in every place where people gather to explore the mysteries of existence. And though the library is gone, its dream remains. In the next part, we approach the closing of this journey, a reflection on why the Library of Alexandria still captures our imagination and what it tells us about the fragile beauty of human knowledge. There is a reason the Library of Alexandria captures our imagination more than any other lost wonder. Other places fell, other cities burned, other treasures vanished, but the library was different. It represented something intimately human, our desire to make sense of the world around us. It held the dreams of countless civilizations, stacked gently in rows of papyrus, each scroll a voice from a distant time. When we think of the library, we do not only imagine its grand halls or its marble columns, we imagine the knowledge it contained. Texts written by hands long turned to dust, ideas born in minds that lived thousands of years ago, questions asked before science had a name, answers sought by people who looked at the stars and wondered just as we do now. The tragedy of the library is not merely that it fell, but that we will never know what was inside. What discoveries were lost? What books disappeared before they could shape the world? What voices could have guided us through centuries of uncertainty? It is this mystery, this silence, that makes the library unforgettable. It stands as a reminder of how delicate human progress can be, how easily ideas can vanish, how quickly knowledge can fade if not protected. And yet, the library also reminds us of our resilience. Despite its destruction, humanity kept learning, kept questioning, kept rebuilding places of knowledge again and again. Because the desire to understand, to explore, to know is stronger than the forces that try to silence it. That is why the library haunts us, because it reflects both our fragility and our strength, a symbol of what we lost and a symbol of what we continue to seek. In the next part, we move toward the emotional close, a reflection not on the past, but on what the story of Alexandria means for us today. When we speak of the Library of Alexandria now, we are not only remembering a building, we are remembering a possibility that knowledge can connect humanity instead of dividing it, that curiosity can be a force more powerful than fear, that ideas, no matter where they come from, have value. In our world today, we have more access to information than any civilization before us. More books, more research, more archives, more ways to learn. But the spirit of Alexandria asks us a deeper question. Do we protect our knowledge as carefully as they once did? Do we value learning for its own sake? Do we listen to ideas that challenge us? Do we preserve stories from cultures different from our own? The ancient library teaches us that knowledge is not just something we store in buildings. It is something we nurture in ourselves, something delicate like a flame. It can burn brightly when protected, or fade quietly when neglected. And in many ways, the world today echoes the ancient one. We still debate, we still disagree, we still search for truth in a sea of noise. We still face moments where understanding feels fragile. Yet every time we choose to learn, to read, to ask, to listen, we rebuild a piece of what Alexandria once stood for. The library also leaves us with a gentle warning. Great knowledge can be lost if we assume it will always be there. History is full of moments where ideas slipped away, not because someone destroyed them, but because no one protected them. And so, as we move through the modern world, full of information, full of voices, full of light, the question remains, what do we do with the knowledge we have? Do we hide it? Do we fear it? Do we use it to divide? Or do we build something worthy of the dream that once stood on the shores of Alexandria? In the next part, we move closer to the ending, a soft reflection on the human spirit that built the library and the human spirit that still remembers it. Beneath all the dates, the emperors, the fires, the shifting empires, the story of the Library of Alexandria is, at its core, a human story. A story about people who looked at the vast world around them and refused to stop asking questions. People who believed that knowledge was not a luxury for the powerful, but a light meant for everyone. People who spent their lives copying fragile scrolls by candlelight, cataloging ideas from distant civilizations, preserving myths, poems, equations, and discoveries so they wouldn't vanish into the silence of time. It is easy to focus on how the library ended, on what was lost, on the tragedy, but the true miracle is not its destruction, it is that such a place ever existed at all. At a time when the world was divided by language, culture, and distance, the library welcomed ideas from everywhere. It saw curiosity not as a danger, but as a gift. And the scholars who walked its halls left behind more than scrolls. They left behind a model of how humanity might live at its best, listening, learning, questioning, sharing, dreaming. The physical library is gone. Its papyrus is dust. Its walls have crumbled. Its halls are silent. But the spirit that built it, that quiet, patient devotion to understanding, lives on every time a person opens a book, asks a question, searches for meaning, or wonders what lies beyond the edge of the known world. The library is not lost because we remember it. We remember it because deep inside, we still want to build it again, not with stone and papyrus, but with every idea we protect, every story we preserve, every discovery we share. And in that sense, the Library of Alexandria never truly disappeared. It simply changed form, moving from a building by the sea to a memory carried in the minds of millions. In the final part, the Khatima, we close this journey softly, with a calm reflection meant to settle the mind and guide the listener gently toward sleep. As the night deepens around you and the world grows quiet, the story of the Library of Alexandria settles gently into stillness. The waves that once touched its walls continue to move, soft and unhurried, carrying memories across centuries. And somewhere in the hush of the evening, you can almost imagine the faint rustle of a scroll, the soft footsteps of a scholar, the glow of a lamp illuminating words written thousands of years ago. The library is gone, its stones scattered, its knowledge dispersed, its halls silent, but its spirit, that delicate flame of human curiosity, still burns. It burns in every question you ask, every story you follow, every moment you choose to learn instead of turn away. It burns in the quiet places, in late-night reading, in whispered thoughts, in the gentle wonder that carries the mind into sleep. Tonight, as you rest, remember that the dream of Alexandria lives in you too, because the library was never only a building. It was a promise that knowledge matters, that curiosity can unite us, and that even in a fragile world, the search for understanding is a kind of light. Let that light stay with you now, soft, calm, steady, guiding you gently toward rest. Close your eyes. Let the story fade. Let the echoes of ancient wisdom carry you into the quiet. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with wonder.